Started now. Good morning, everybody. And it is my pleasure to be here introducing Dr. Jean Tirol, Nobel laureate, and also to chair this session. I consider it as I'm absolutely delighted to do this. And I'll take a few minutes to give him the brief summary of his achievements. Professor Jean Tirole received the Nobel Prize in Economics in the year 2014 for analysis of market power and regulation. He carefully analyzed how markets work and used mathematical models to study the ways in which markets fail in the absence of sufficient competition. His research showed that the one-size-fits-all approach of previous models, which recommended price caps for monopolies to prevent them from charging too much for the products, did not always have the favorable social outcomes. Although such policies would encourage greater production of efficiency by those firms, which is a good thing for the society, but they may also permit excessive profits if those firms are allowed to continue to operate as monopolies. He adapted his models to study a number of specific industries ranging from telecommunications to banking that is highly regulated to their tendency to form monopolies. And I want to briefly tell you also the important achievements and after completing the engineering courses in École Polytechnique and École Nationale des Points of Chassis, permit me, the pronunciation may be sometimes wrong. In Paris, he turned his interest to economics and mathematics. Economics was not an obvious choice of study of Professor Jean Tirole, given his family background. In 1976, he joined the engineering course of roads and bridges and applied course of civil servants, and accordingly studied at the École des Points or at Chassis, a school created in 1747. And then in 1981, he received the doctorate in economics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in USA, and he maintained his connections to MIT in part as a professor of economics from 1984 to 1991. Since 1992, he has worked at the School of Economics at the University of Toulouse in France. Professor Jean Tirole received several accolades and honors and awards. CME MSRI Award and the Levi-Strauss Prize in 2010, elected to Alois Chair at the French Académie des Sciences Morales in Polytechnique in 2011, the Rose Prize in 2013, and Nemers Prize in Economics in 2014, and the Thierry de la Organisation Industrial Economics 2015, and Economic du Bien Commune in 2016 by Presses Universities de France. I have great pleasure in requesting Professor Jean Tirole to present his talk. Sir?
Okay, thanks so much. Well, good morning, and thanks for those kind words, sir. I appreciate very much being here. It's a great honor to be speaking in front of you today. And I will be talking about business innovation and society in the digital age. Just as a matter of an introduction, let me remind you that most industries are already impacted by this revolution, sometimes because of great discoveries, sometimes because of very minor innovations. Very little is needed in order to disrupt an industry's Uber, for example, is a case in point. I mean, if you look at what Uber has done It has done very, very little innovation. Actually, it has imitated many things that already existed, like geo-tracking or using credit cards, which are already pre-registered, ratings of drivers and clients, peak load pricing, and so on. But more generally, it's not only industry which is being changed, it's also government, social movements, organization of firms which tend to be flatter, and public policy, which of course as an economist I care a lot about. So it goes from intellectual property, competition policy, labor policy, and anything which has to do with solidarity and inequality, so taxation is an obvious item there. So the point is that we have to rethink business model and public policies. And in those 45 minutes, it's very short. What I will do is basically go through a few themes and tell you a little bit what economists. I know that almost all of you are not economists, but just to tell you a little bit what economists are doing, and maybe give you some feel for why you should be doing economics as well. I was trained as an engineer myself, so I can understand your concern, but then I move on later on to economics, which I found also fascinating. So here's the outline of the lecture. I will talk in general terms about the economics of platforms, then talk about the challenges for our societies, and I was asked to talk about how we can promote innovation. Of course, it's a big theme here in this 104th Congress. And finally, I will conclude very briefly. So let me start with the economics of platforms. So what do platforms do? They bring multiple sites on board who want to interact with each other. So for example, if you think about the PlayStation or the Xbox, it has to attract both game developers and you and me, the users of the game platform. Same thing for an operating systems like Windows. If you think about a portal like Google, you have to attract what's called eyeballs and advertisers. If you think about Visa or MasterCard or PayPal or American Express, you must have merchant accepting the card and also people having a credit card, a debit card in their pocket and using that card. And I could say the same thing for the sharing economy. So here are examples of two-sided platforms. More generally, those are multi-sided platforms. Now, very roughly what those platforms do, and this is very rough, is two things. The first is basically match people with each other. They solve either a matching problem, are your tastes similar to mine, or they solve a quality problem, which is, am I a reliable person, someone you can trust? Either way. And on the two fronts, actually, I would like to talk a little bit about the economics of attention. So in the old time, when you wanted to trade with someone, when you wanted to meet someone or whatever, you had only a very small choice, a choice in your village, among your friends, and that was about it. Now it's a reverse. You have an oversupply. You can trade and you can meet the entire world. Through the internet, a few clicks will do. So what happens is that you have a problem of what's called the economics of attention. You have to pay attention, and you don't know whom to trade with, whom you can trust. And part of what platforms do is first to try to help you predict with whom you like to match in terms of taste, but what kind of products you will like, but also whom you can trust. So think of those platforms as being Google or Uber, Amazon, Airbnb, and so on. Booking, which will help you find an hotel, which hopefully will be reliable. There's a second set of platforms, it's a very rough description, but there's a second set of platforms which have to do with enabling better interaction between the users. So Skype, for example, will be you're already in interaction with your family and friends, but you get a better interaction through Skype. And same thing, I will say the same thing for debit and credit cards or Facebook or the PlayStation. It's really a technological platform that improves things. Now, if you're an economist, you have to think about the economics of platform, and that's what economists have been doing in the last 15, 20 years. And I'm just going to give you extremely broad principles. You know, when you run a platform, you have multiple decisions to make. The first is what kind of prices do you charge to each side? How do you allocate costs between the two sides? And there are decisions which are non-price decisions as well. So in terms of prices, let me be a little bit technical. I mean, if you're not an economist, you may, but it's pretty intuitive. It's what business people do. When you choose a price, you have to take into account what we economists call the elasticity of demand. So elasticity of demand simply means if you raise a price on one side a little bit, what percentage of consumer are you going to lose on that side? So it's a standard concept of what the market can bear on that side. And of course, that you have to take into account. Now, what's interesting in a two-sided platform is the second thing is that you have to account for the fact that if you attract one more consumer on side one, say you attract one more consumer, then you're going to create surplus on the other side. So for example, I'll give you examples, but you know, if you attract, say, eyeballs, you know, people who are going to be on the portal, then the advertisers will be very happy about that, and it will make your platform more attractive. So for example, if one side has a high value to the other side, there's a big externality if you want, then you are going to charge on that side a low price. On the other side, you'll be able to charge a higher price. But as an economist, what you have to take home from this is that the price structure has nothing to do with a fair allocation of costs. So you don't try to allocate the cost of the platform fairly, rather you're going to do it in such a way that you attract both sides. So here are examples of pricing structures which are extremely skewed. That are very familiar with you. So think about, Google. You go on Google, you get wonderful services, you have a very good search engine, and you get YouTube, and you get email, and you get many other things for free. So it's heavily subsidized on the side. Of course, there is no secret, which is that the advertisers are going to pay a huge amount of money to Google. So on one side, you get a product for free, which is wonderful. On the other side, you have very high charges on the advertiser. It's the same thing for debit and credit card in most countries. I don't know about India, but in most countries, debit and credit cards now are free. You get this wonderful service for free. Sometimes you are even paid. So you get cashback bonuses, you get frequent flyer miles for using your card. But of course, there is no secret, which is that Visa, American Express, PayPal are going to charge 1%, 2%, or 3% to the merchant on the other side. So that's one aspect of it. You have to think, and now economists have worked on that, and now you have business consultants who work on that, how to think about the business model for the platform. But platforms are also, it's not only prices they have to choose, they have to choose a host of different policies. So just to motivate that, just think about the traditional view, which I will call the vertical view. So just to take an example, imagine that you are a biologist in Tirupati or Chennai, and you invent a new molecule, you have a startup, and you get a patent on it. What you're going to do is to license or sell your patent to big pharma, because you don't have the ability, you don't know how to market and to test those drugs. You are the scientist who has done the discovery, and big pharma will be better at managing the process afterwards. Now, big pharma then will get a license, which usually is an exclusive license, It's almost always an exclusive license. And then we'll try to get as much money as possible from the buyers. The buyers can be you and me, or can be an hospital, or can be the government, depending on the country. Now, notice that in this case, what could be called a platform is you, the drug inventor, the startup, then which is going to sell to a seller and then sell to a buyer. But it will be a vertical view. And notice that you, as a biotech startup, you will have no connection whatsoever with a drug buyer. So in a sense, you don't care about the welfare of the drug buyer, and that's why you are going to award an exclusive license to the pharmaceutical company, because you want the pharmaceutical company to make as much money as possible. In that case, you can license the drug at the highest possible price. The big difference between this view and the two-sided market is that in the two-sided market, the platform also has a connection, has a relationship with the buyer. And therefore, because it has a relationship with the buyer and can charge a buyer, or has to attract the buyer at least, then it has to be kind to the buyer as well. So it's going to regulate in many ways, and I'll be a bit short on that, but there are many ways in which the platform will be somewhat protective of the buyer's interests, precisely because it has a relationship with the buyer. So for example, it will license, I mean, you all know that in the sharing economy, it will make sure that bad sellers are not around if possible, through training, background checks, terminating Uber drivers, for example, if they have a poor reputation. But there are many other cases. So for example, in security exchanges, there are solvency requirements and many other ways in which you select the participants. So relatedly, you are going to supply information enforcement. That's a sharing economy ratings, feedback forum, some money-back guarantees, some arbitration processes. Sometimes it will try to create, and very often actually will try to create competition between sellers so as to improve the attractiveness to the buyers. So having multiple applications, either external applications or internal versus external application competition. And finally, sometimes it will even act as a price regulator so that the sellers don't always charge too much the buyer. Again, because you have a relationship with the buyer and you're trying to attract buyers, you don't want the sellers to exploit too much the buyer, and you will be somewhat protective of the buyer's interest. So it's a very different business models, and the theory basically gives you something very different. Now, it's not a bad thing, I must say, but we have some concerns now in many industries, and that will be one of my themes, is that we have to think about how to regulate efficiency those platforms. We don't know how to do that yet, except in a couple of cases. So one of the cases I want to talk about, which has arisen lately and is very important, is a case of what I will call the must-join platform. So it's a platform that you can, in principle, bypass. You can avoid the platform and, for example, go directly to the merchant, but in practice, you may not have an incentive to. So that will be much easier if I give you examples of that. So think about an online booking system like Booking.com or Expedia. As a user, you can book an hotel or an airline ticket through Booking.com, and you'll buy from the merchant at that point of time. Or you can bypass the platform and basically call the hotel or the airline directly or go online to their website. Either way, you have the choice. Now, a very important thing in many instances, the platform requires that the price which is charged by the merchant to the users, to the consumers, to you and me, is independent of the way the transaction is realized. So if you book through Booking.com, you are going to pay the same price for your hotel as if you call the hotel directly in many countries. Okay? Same thing for the airlines and so on. So they require what's called price coherence. It has various names. It's also called parity or the most favored nation clause. But basically, the Booking.com is going to require that the same price be charged, regardless of whether the booking is done through Booking.com or directly from the hotel or the airline. Same thing for, in a number of countries, for debit card and credit cards. This is called the no surcharge rule. You're not supposed to charge a different price if the purchase is made through a card or through cash, for example, which is a direct way of doing it, cash or check. Now, here is the issue, and this is something we have been confronted with in Europe in particular, but it's a very broad issue, and it's going to surface all the time in the new economy. If you have price coherence, which means that you're going to pay the same amount regardless of whether you use a platform or not, and furthermore, all the merchants are on the platform. Okay, so just assume that all the merchants are on the platform. Now, if all the merchants are on the platform and you'll pay the same price regardless, then you should go to the platform as a user because you'll find all the merchants and you won't be paying more. Okay? That means that a merchant, if a merchant wants to reach the consumer, the merchant has to accept the platform, being on the platform, and therefore has to accept the terms which are imposed by the platform on the merchant. And it's, what happens is that the merchant fee, which is a fee paid by the merchant to the platform, can be extremely high. So for PayPal, it's going to be 3%, but if you think about Booking.com, it can be 15, 20, or 25% of the hotel room. So they can take a big slice of the value just because they are a must-join platform. If a merchant doesn't join Booking, then the people who are using Booking will never know, and they use only Booking for the reason I've explained. The merchant will never be able to reach those consumers who are using Booking, and same thing for Expedia and so on. So you have must-join platforms, and those platforms must be regulated because they can overcharge the merchants quite a lot. Now, there are good reasons, and that's something I've been working on as well, for also price coherence. So it's actually, for example, you don't want to have excessive surcharges. Sometimes when you go to a website to book an airline ticket, then you have a lot of money which is added at the end in terms of a card surcharge. That's bad as well. So you have to find the right way. For credit cards, we have found a rule, but more generally, there's a big issue of how to regulate those platforms. It's pretty complicated. Let me just talk a little bit about the antitrust. And again, I'm going a little bit fast, but I think it's important that you get a taste of what we economists are doing, and also where the weaknesses of economics are, and where we should be doing more work in order to improve our society for the common good. The issue is more and more one of not competition in the market, but more and more dynamic contestability. So what we have a lot in the new economy are natural monopolies, or big monopolies, or duopolies, maybe triopolies, but very few firms. And we have very few firms because you have very high return to scale, you have big investment, and also you have what's called network externalities. So network externalities simply means that I benefit from being on a platform if you also are on the platform. And they can be direct, so if you're on Facebook, I want to be on Facebook because that's the way I will be able to reach you. Or they can be indirect. So for example, think about Google. Google is very good for low traffic search compared, say, to Bing, simply because it has more traffic, and therefore its algorithms can do better in terms of predicting what you want. So if there are more people on Chrome, then Chrome is going to be able to offer a better service. Same thing for Waze, the application to tell you where to drive and which route you should be taking. For low traffic routes, Waze is very good because it has, at least in Europe, I don't know about India, but it has very good predictive power because it has a lot of consumers. So you have indirect network anxiety. It's not that you want to interact with the other users, but simply the platform does a better job in terms of service. Now, the big challenge is that we are always going to have those monopolies and oligopolies, and they can do bad things. So we have to know how to regulate it. And one of the obvious conclusions is that it must be the case that if someone more efficient comes in, this firm be able to displace the incumbent. So you want to have dynamic contestability. So if Google is less efficient tomorrow than some entrant, you want this entrant to be able to enter. And one of the obstacles to entry is what's called bundling. Bundling means that you offer several products as a single combined product. And that's bad because in general, when you enter on a small niche, both because it's very expensive to enter on multiple products at the same time, and also it's very risky. You cannot succeed in all components at the same time. So it's very important that entrants can enter not only on the full scale of products, but can enter on a single product at some point. So think about Google. Google now is an empire and has many product lines, but to start with, it entered a specific niche, which was a search engine. Amazon is everywhere. I saw in India lots of advertisements for Amazon Prime. It's everywhere now, but it started on a niche, which was selling books on the internet. If you think about Uber, it's the same thing. You will think Uber is trying to displace taxis. No, that's not what Uber is doing. Anyway, in 5 years or 10 years, with driverless cars, there won't be any taxis anymore. That's not what Uber is trying to do. It's trying to expand, to create a brand name and get information on consumers, and in order to then expand the product line to many different things. So you try to enter in a niche, and then you expand the product line, and that's why it's very important that there is no bundling, so that the efficient entrants can enter in a single product and then expand. Let me ignore, I'm doing on time. Let me ignore the ownership and portability of data, which is a big, big issue and challenging issue. It's a very interesting one. And let me move on to the economic and social challenges, because let me just say this thing. The digital economy is full of opportunities. It's going to create a lot of wealth. It's also going to create a lot of problems. And we have to think about those problems. So you as scientists, you are going to contribute to this creation of wealth, which is going to be tremendous and very useful for mankind. But at the same time, we all have to realize that there are lots of difficulties which are going to come with it, and we have to anticipate those difficulties because we haven't done so yet, including economists, by the way. It's not only scientists and the civil society. We need to think more about it. Something which is talked a lot about is privacy and trust in the data collector. We are spied upon by many platforms. It's pejorative, but not only, because it's actually quite useful as well. If you think about this knowledge, it allows firms and consumers to build individual reputations on eBay and many other things. The Uber revolution, or Ola, I guess, in India, is that you can know how reliable the taxi driver is. Ad targeting, you get better ads which are targeted to your own taste. Efficient matching, you are matched with people or with items like books that you are likely to like. So actually, privacy goes against some good things, but also it can be useful, and we have to be concerned about, we have seen a number of underinvestment in security against breach. We are worried about undue resale, non-contracted for resale of data, the non-respect for the right to oblivion, And to be honest, sometimes we are not very rational. I don't know about you, but very often when I go onto a website, I click, I give my consent because I'm in a rush. I really want to see the website, and I don't even read. I don't even read what's going to happen to me because I give the data to the website, whatever website it is. And actually, to be honest, even if I read this consent, this informed consent agreement, I would not even know what the consequences are. So not only I'm kind of impatient and might be going against my own interest, but I just don't know. So we have to think about how to regulate that. And it's not easy because, like I say, privacy is very important, but at the same time it's going to kill some very useful services. So we have to understand how we do that. Second concern, which is very big in Europe, and maybe in the US as well, and I'm sure in most countries, is the issue of job destruction and creation. So here I have in mind the digital economy, artificial intelligence, deep learning, robots. They destroy jobs, especially jobs that can be easily codified, are routine or repetitive, but not only, because with AI, most of our jobs now are going to be threatened, including, a doctor, a lawyer, a professor. It's going to be complicated today even skilled jobs are going to be replaced. At the same time, there are lots of other jobs which are being created along the way. And I would like to argue it's not a new phenomenon. I mean, early 2 centuries ago, early in the 19th century, workers were destroying the looms because they were worried that actually they were displaced by machines. And of course, 2 centuries later, there is no more unemployment. Actually, there is very little unemployment in many countries. I'm not talking about my home countries, but agriculture has basically disappeared in the U.S. In terms of manpower, not in terms of output, but in terms of manpower. And yet, the other jobs have been created. So what's new is, I think, is the speed, which is that it's normal for an economy to have jobs destroyed and created, and that's not what creates unemployment. However, it's going to go very fast. It's going to happen much faster than it has happened in the past. And there are losers, and there will be big losers, just like there have been losers from globalization. There are also losers from the technology change. And we have to take that into account, and we have to invent new solutions. There is a question of adaptability of society to this new situation. And I would like to insist on the fact that the issue is not a shortage of jobs, but it's going to be a shortage of jobs that people will want to take, given their qualification. And that will bring me to the question of inequality that I will talk about later on. In Europe, there is also a debate about whether people in the new economy are employed or independent workers. And in my view, it's a pretty silly debate because it's a debate which is undecidable. If you take a Uber driver is both employed by Uber and also is independent, because in practice, there are many control rights, and some of them goes to the employer and some of them go to the employee. And where you put the dividing line is unclear. So think about the Uber driver. The Uber driver doesn't set prices, but independent taxi drivers don't set their prices either because they are regulated. In France, the doctor, the basic prices are regulated as well, and there are, a number of them are independent. Uber is going to decide on training, cleanliness of cars, but quality control also exists for independents. So if you think about a wine region in France, then there will also be some quality control, even if so the wine growers are independent. You can be kicked out by Uber, as I said. At the same time, Uber drivers are independent because they control their workload, their location, at what time they want to work, and so on. So you'll never be able to decide. I mean, lawyers spend a lot of time on that, but it's completely useless. you'll never be able to decide whether someone is salaried or independent. And the important thing, in my view, is the level playing field. So it's very important that regulation, fiscal, taxation, social security contribution, and so on, be neutral in health insurance, be neutral with respect to the organizational form. That's a very important thing. Now, will salaried work disappear? I don't know. I mean, as an economist, it's always hard to predict things. My guess, lots of people say yes, my guess is it's not going to disappear. It's going to disappear somewhat. One of the reasons I gave you, which is very important, is that now people can build independent reputations. So I, as a Uber driver, I can build my own reputation for being reliable, whereas in the past, it was a taxi company which has a reputation. Individual drivers didn't have a reputation, but now with internet and ratings, you can have your individual reputation. So that means that you can be independent, whereas before you had to be part of a company in some way. And the company had to exert some monitoring over you. It's easier to connect with customers, your back office is simplified, and so on and so forth. But I will argue that salaried work will remain, both because sometimes you have large investments, so we won't be able as individuals to afford those investments, or we may be very risk averse because entrepreneurship is risky, and those who are very risk averse, they may not want to get into that. Sometimes also it's efficient to have a single employer, for example, for trade secrets reasons, okay? So it's not clear. I will not think that salaried work is going to disappear, but it's going to be reduced in the future. Other issue, which is very important, is solidarity and inequality. So one of the issues is the solidarity in the health insurance market. So nowadays we have more and more possibilities for selecting risk. Google, Facebook, and all the platforms you go to have a lot of information about you. So they know a lot about your risk of becoming sick. And that's an issue because then they can select. If they can predict you'll be in good health, they will give you a good price for your health insurance. Whereas if you are going to be in bad health, then they will charge you a bad price, and that's going to get worse with genetics. So we have to worry in whether your health insurance system is public, like in the UK or in France, or private, like in Germany or the Netherlands or Switzerland. You have to make sure that there is no risk selection by the private firms or the firms in general. So we have to preserve solidarity in health insurance, and inequality is a big issue as well. So as you all know, there's been a huge increase in inequality in the last 20, 30 years, and especially a polarization which has been documented. So the middle class is disappearing, the unskilled or the less skilled see their wage stagnating, and the very skilled see their wage increase a huge amount. And that's, in my view, it's going to get worse with the digital economy. There will be very important wealth created, which is good. But the point is, we would like to redistribute this digital windfall, just like, for countries which have oil, you have a oil windfall. We might want to redistribute this windfall, but there are two limits to that. The first is dignity, which is that people want to work. They just don't want to be assisted and get the money every month from the state. Sure, we'll need a universal income, but at what level? People really want to work in the end. And the other thing, which is, I think, new, is that the tax base is going to be very mobile internationally, and that's something that scares me, honestly. If you think about people who are creating Uber or Facebook or Snapchat or whatever, there are 3, 4, 5 people, and they are internationally mobile. So they can take their firm to the country which will be offering them the best terms. So it's not like a big electricity company which is not going to move its plant abroad. With those new companies in biotech or in IT, it's very easy to move the companies abroad very quickly. And that means that there will be a lot of inequalities across countries as well. Even in countries which have a very talented workforce, it's going to be very hard to keep this workforce. So it's very threatening environment. I'm very scared by that. And we have to devise a policy response. We have not done so yet. Of course, an international agreement would be great, but as we know from climate change, it's not very easy to reach. We know there are some bad policies. Protectionism, turning inward, is a bad policy. It's going to make everyone poorer. You know, the trade, the division of labor and trade has enriched in many centuries the countries which have turned inwards have always turned poorer, and there's always been retaliation against them. It's very bad. So protectionism is and we see them in every country nowadays. The move toward protectionism is very concerning, I must say. Technology denial, I don't have to convince you, will be very bad. Just denying there is a move in technology. And we don't know, we need clearly education is going to be very important. At school, on the job, in universities, and getting the right governance for universities and right funding for universities is obviously very important. Innovation, protect the workers, not the jobs, because the jobs are changing all the time. They are changing very fast. It's going to be very hard to protect the jobs, but we have to protect the workers in many ways. Okay? Let me say a few words before we started late, so let me say a few words about innovation, because that's obviously a big concern of you, a big concern of India, and a big concern of all countries. We have had countries which have been playing catching up, including my own country, just after World War II, just like Japan and Korea did, or China did in the last 30 years, or India is doing. But of course, if you want to go further, when you get to the technological frontier, you have to innovate, and that's why innovation, and 21st century will be the century of knowledge, the knowledge-based economy, so you are the future of the economy, and that's very important. School and universities are going to be central in that process, even more than before. But you have lots of institutional issues which are going to be faced, which I don't have time to discuss, which have to do with financing, which will be targeted to entrepreneurship, not rents, having competition policy, as I was mentioning, various issues having to do with law, bankruptcy, labor law, business, and so on. And something I've worked a lot about is intellectual property, patents, standard setting, and the like, which is also extremely, extremely important. To meet the entrepreneurship imperative, you need three things. The first obvious thing is that you need entrepreneurs. Innovation requires entrepreneurs. Sometimes high-tech entrepreneurs, people like you, who are moving science. So I think, for example, about biotech, some aspects of IT. But as I said, innovation is not always rocket science. If you think about the innovation of Facebook, Netflix, Uber, Airbnb, which are huge firms, very profitable firms, their innovations are very, very small. So what's important is not only knowledge, but it's also an entrepreneurial spirit at all levels of the economy. And by the way, it's not new. If you look at the big innovations of the 19th century in the US, many of them were done by pretty uneducated people, but they were real entrepreneurs. And they have changed the railroad or electricity or agriculture industry and so on. So it's not only we need very good universities and very top researchers creating startups with their students, but we also need more generally an entrepreneurial spirit. We need venture capitalists and business angels, And I don't have time to get into it, but in my own country, people don't always understand. I don't know about India, what business angels and venture capitalists do. And what they do is not only to bring their own money for credibility reasons, they screen very intensively, they monitor ex-post, they organize a stage financing, they do lots of different things, and it's a really important and complex process that you have to understand in order for it to work. And when I see governments entering this business, they don't enter this business always in the right way, because they think that if you just pour money into something, it's going to work. And the truth is that if you don't do it right, it's kind of useless. So you have to learn about how VC works, how business angels work, in order to do it right. It just doesn't suffice to bring in money in there. Okay, and that raises the issue of public finances. Let me say a last word, and I'm going to conclude afterwards, about industrial policy. Industrial policy, the definition is that you target specific sectors, biotech, for example, or specific firms. You try to help this firm. And there are good arguments for doing industrial policy, and also very bad arguments for doing it. So the good arguments is that sometimes there's a failure of coordination. Very often you need some common infrastructures. You need roads, you need internet connection, you need things like that. And sometimes also you might want to protect the infant industry while it's growing, because it has some difficulty with financing and the like. And there have been some success, but there have also been a number of failures, which are due to two things. The first is a possible capture of the process by firms. And you see quite a lot of that. I don't know about India, but in many countries you see a lot of capture, either because of favoritism, friends of government get the money, or just because of national pride or protectionism, so you get, or just because of lobbying, after all, you get sustained protection against competition. So you are protected for a long time against competition. But the main reason is not capture. I mean, it's one important reason, but the other one is simply the lack of information. Even some very competent and well-intentioned policymaker does not have the information required to pick winners. So that gives rise to what's called white elephants, projects which actually go nowhere. I've observed many clusters which don't fulfill their promises. And it also fosters rent-seeking. So I can tell you in my home country, large firms have entire staff dedicated to chasing subsidies. So they have staffs, they already have their projects, and they're trying. Those projects will be financed anyway, and they are trying to look for subsidy schemes which are going to finance those projects just to get extra money. So it's a windfall profit with very little impact of the policy. So I will conclude with this. If you want to do industrial policy, you have to do it right. And there are a number of conditions which often are not met when you do industrial policy. The first thing is that you have to use independent experts. And that's not always easy to do, but you will understand that very quickly. Some of the successes of industrial policies are actually in universities. Lots of the stuff is financed by the government. And when to work well, it works through independent agencies and peer reviews. So if you think about in the US about the NSF or the NIH, it has been extremely successful because it works, it's independent. Donald Trump cannot really get into who is going to get this grant on climate change. It might reduce the budget on climate change research possibly, but he cannot really say who is going to get the money. And it's done by peer reviews, and that's very important. Same thing for the invention of the internet by DARPA, and I could give you some more examples. Second principle, you want to impose independent ex post evaluation, so you want to see if the program has, and it's natural to fail. It has to fail sometimes, but you want to know why was it badly conceived or not. Third point, which I think is important, is always forgotten, is you have to check the supply side. You have to check the supply side. You know, when you talk to people, they say, we're going to put money here to create a cluster in biotech, for example. And then you ask the people, do you have the people who are going to make it happen? Do you have the people who are good enough to attract other people and create a vibrant environment for research and technology? And they never thought about that. They just wanted to have a building and to have money there, and they never thought about whether it could work if you have the people to do it. So you have to choose the supplies, to check the supply side. Fourth item, you must remain competition neutral. Do not protect the incumbents. Fifth item, you have to include sunset provisions. So you have to say, after a while, that's over. I mean, you might refinance, but then with a very strict evaluation. You might want to use, and it's often done, you might want to use co-financing by the private sector. We could have a long discussion of that, but just to make sure that it's not a completely white elephant, and it's not something which is going to be completely wasteful. And finally, you want to have one-stop shop. So I don't know again about India, but for example, in France, if you want subsidies for R&D, you have over 60 places where you're going to look for money. So you have firms, they put a lot of their staff looking for amounts of money here and there. It's a waste of time for everyone, and there is no coordination of how it's done. So I'm concluding with this, and this will be my last slide. I'm a bit behind, but we started late, I'm sorry. The 21st century will be knowledge-based. You are the future of the economy. It's very important. There are huge opportunities, but what I've tried to convince you in this speech is that we have to meet the business challenge, how to do it, and also the public policies challenge, what will be the stance of the government with respect to the new economy. I've insisted on the role of governance. I didn't have time to talk about science, but it's very important also, as you know, in universities, to have independent, autonomous universities, to have funding through peer review, independent peer review, and the like. Now, India has clearly the human capital to meet the challenge, but like any country, it will have to meet those challenges and think about it. And we economists, we scientists, and the civil society has to be thinking much harder about this issue. I don't think we are ready for the society we are going to have. So let me conclude by saying I was very honored to be addressing this audience and to be invited, and I wish you a very successful 104th Indian Science Congress. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard an absolutely brilliant exposition on markets and regulation by famous economist Jean Tirole. He touched upon various aspects of platforms, involvement of search engines, and economics and social challenges, innovations and entrepreneurship. In such a short time in a capsule, he covered so many things. Let us give a big hand and appreciate. Yes, one or two questions or clarifications, I think with the permission of Dr. Tirole. Yes, please.
I'm Dr. P.N. Rao from Hyderabad. Do you think that the policymakers succeed in regulating the monopolies?
Well, that's a big issue, of course, because as I explained you, we will have monopolies. You see them in the video game industry, you see them in the operating systems, you see them in the new platforms, internet platforms, and everywhere. So it's not like the monopolies are going to go away. I think what's becoming important is to make sure that the entrants can enter. So it's actually difficult because sometimes when they do bundling, so for example, they offer a service together for free, together with the main item. Sometimes it can be efficient for compatibility reasons, other reasons. And you as an antitrust authority, you have to get in and say, no, you have to give more access. Not only, and you need the good APIs, the application programming interfaces, so that the entrants can enter. So it becomes something pretty difficult to, but the competition authorities are trying to do that on the competition front. But there are other fronts as well. So taxation is a big issue. So in Europe, we have succeeded in taxing at least in terms of VAT. So for example, if Amazon sells a book in France from Luxembourg, then the French is going to call to collect the VAT on it. But in terms of collecting a corporate tax, for example, we don't know how to do it yet without collaboration of the countries, because, for example, when I use Google in France, I use Waze, Chrome, or YouTube. I don't pay anything, so they cannot collect VAT, they can collect corporate tax. But in the end, Google is going to charge the advertiser somewhere in Ireland, and then we'll repatriate the profits to the Bahamas, and we'll wait until the Trump amnesty to bring the money back to the US. And those things having to do with taxation are very, very hard. We know with transfer pricing that you can do pretty much what you want. And it's even easier with intellectual property because the flows are very hard to measure. It's just intellectual property. And in the end, it's just like for inequality, we need some collaboration between countries. And I wish, and that's one of the big challenges, as I might say, just like for climate change, we are at level 0 in that process. We need to collaborate much more across countries.
Sir, inside the country,
Discussion later, we can take up only one more question.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, inside the country, for e-commerce platforms, is it the buyer or is it the seller or the platform that has to be taxed? What is the global trend for that? There is a problem in India. There is e-commerce sites like Amazon. Actually, the sellers are in some states are selling or taxed, not the e-commerce platform. But what is the global trend for that? There is a conflict between the platform and the seller.
So if it's just a VAT, a value-added tax or an excise tax, it doesn't matter too much because the prices of the sellers are going to change. If you collect the tax on the seller, for example, they will pass it through to the buyer. So if it's just a good which is being transferred, say, from a bookstore to you through Amazon, then you just collect the VAT tax. Now, where it becomes difficult is that I understand in India, I'm not a specialist of India, but you have different taxation in different states. So in that sense, it's a little bit like Europe, which is, you have different VATs, for example, in different countries in Europe. And unfortunately, and I never understood why, but in India, you have those barriers to trade within India, which in my view don't make much sense. It will be useful to have a single taxation scheme, but even if you don't have a single taxation scheme, what you want is the VAT to be paid by the consumer where the consumer is located. And that's what we have done very recently in Europe, because before that, the firms will be moving to Luxembourg, for example, and they will put their stuff in Luxembourg with a low VAT, and then they will ship the thing in France so as to avoid the higher VAT in France. So that's the bottom line. And now you have to cooperate among states within India, not across countries, but you have to do the same thing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's give a big applause to Professor Dean Powell. Now I request Professor D. Narayan Rao, General President, Indian Science Congress, to present a memento to our speaker, Professor Jean Terry. And I request the President to present a memento to Professor R. Ramamurthy, former Vice Chancellor of Sri Venkateswara University. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. A few announcements. Now our next sessions of the Indian Science Congress meeting will be held in the Senate Hall, which is adjacent to this building, the left side. You have to get in the steps. Read out the dates. Yes. Okay, sir. Yes, sir. So that until that 1:30 hours. That is. Okay, right. Okay.
So the next industry academia interaction and space technology sessions will be held in the Senate Hall in the administrative building. The session planned in the Senate Hall, Science and Technology in the Neighborhood, Extended Neighborhood and African countries will be held in the Chemistry Hall of Physical Sciences building, room number 313. I request all the dignitaries and delegates to move to these two venues. Thank you so much.